join me in welcoming Dr. James Angel all the way from USA. Thank you so much.
Good morning. It is quite an honor to be here, and I want to thank the excellencies, the delegates, and all of the honored guests for all of the great hospitality that I have received here in Pakistan so far. The theme of this conference is regional integration of our capital markets. And I thought one thing we should do is make sure we understand the benefits that capital markets provide for society. Because we have that, so we need to talk about why we actually have capital markets. What do they do for society? And then that will set the stage for how we think about the benefits and costs of regional integration. But first, let's ask the question of what good are financial markets? Now, those of us who work in the industry, we know the benefits that are provided for society, but we rarely articulate them well to the general public. There are many people out there who basically view the financial industry as a bunch of gangsters who deal in riba and who rip off consumers. But we know that our financial markets help people live better lives. And that is really a message we rarely get out. But how do we help people live better lives? In many ways. For example, the payment system helps reduce the transaction costs of daily living. The ability to transfer payments from one place to another quickly and efficiently saves a lot of time and a lot of effort. The shoe leather costs, as we call them, of daily life. And indeed, the payment system, when you actually add up the numbers, country after country, it's anywhere between 1% and 3% of GDP just chasing money around. But there's more. Financial markets provide a time machine by allowing us to unbundle the timing of when we make money and when we spend money. And that really helps people to live better lives in so many different ways. For example, we can take our spending power today and move it into the future. So I can take money out of my paycheck, invest it in our financial markets, so when I retire many years from now, there will be spending power for me to live on. But that time machine works in the other direction as well. If I want to buy a car or buy a house, the financial system will lend me the money that I can pay for with future earnings. And that allows us to smooth out our consumption, our earnings, and our spending. But it works even more for businesses as well, because we know it takes a lot of resources to build a business. And indeed, when you think about the capital required to do something like roll out a mobile telephone network, or build a new airplane, or even a new skyscraper, far beyond the means of most individuals. But our capital markets allow us to bring resources from all over the world to make these things happen. And indeed, our capital markets make modern technology possible. But they do more. Not only do they gather the resources, they also help to direct the resources towards the most productive uses. Because when investors have free information, they will naturally want to put their resources into the areas that create the most value. And on a planet with finite resources, we need to make the most value of all the finite resources that we have. Indeed, We like to say that the capital markets allow investors to put their money where their mouth is. And in the markets, by discovering the price, that helps to direct investments. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not one of these ideologues who says financial markets are perfect and everything works well. No, we know it is a messy and imperfect process. But there's one thing that we learned in the last century, and that is that capital markets did a much better job of directing investment than Joseph Stalin's Soviet planners did. Why is that? Information. Because the capital markets gather all the information. And no matter how smart, no matter how wise, no matter how good-hearted or benevolent a central planner is, they don't have all the information that a market can gather together. And that's one of the major benefits of markets. But there's more. And this is something that is widely misunderstood by the general public. But our markets provide risk management tools that allow people to live better lives. For example, we all know that we can get insurance against disasters, whether your car is in an accident, or your house burns down, or the breadwinner in the family dies prematurely. Our financial system provides a risk management tool through insurance to basically help soften the blow. But our financial markets provide more. For example, they provide diversification opportunities. They allow investors to spread out the risk over different investments, and that brings down the total risk. Here's one of my favorite graphs in all of finance, that if you've ever had the misfortune of taking a finance course, you've seen this graph. But what we have on the vertical axis is risk, and what we have on the horizontal is, we have risk and we have the number of assets in the portfolio. And what we know from when you do the maths, what you see is that when you add assets to a portfolio, the risk goes down. It doesn't go down to zero, no, but it does reduce it to manageable levels. But even more important, good risk management tools can help society increase production because producers have a lot of price risk. They may be good at growing the food or producing the energy or mining the metals, but they're at the mercy of world markets. And a producer may not be willing to take the price risk in order to produce the goods and services we need in our society. For example, suppose that food prices are high due to political turmoil or war. A farmer might say, hey, at the current price, I can take this field, which may or may not be that great, I can plant a crop and afford to do so. But what happens if prices fall? We all know that commodity prices are volatile. And if prices fall, that farmer might say, I can't take the risk. I would lose my farm if prices fall and I can't afford to pay for things. But if the farmer can lay off that price risk, can find some kind of price insurance, then the farmer can say, hey, I can afford to plant that crop. And indeed, there are many cases in world history where prices have dropped, causing financial distress. Over in Bengal in 1865, after the US Civil War ended, cotton prices fell, causing financial distress all the way over here. But financial markets, through commodity exchanges, through futures, through derivatives, can provide the kind of price insurance that will help producers hedge and manage their risk, and that can give them the certainty that they need to produce more goods and services for society. But there's more. This is a dirty secret in the industry, but financial markets produce entertainment. That, entertainment is socially valuable. People pay to go to concerts. People pay to go to sporting events. And some people, play the market. And I would argue that it's far better for society for somebody to scratch that itch to invest in the market, because they're bringing in capital, they're bringing in information, they're bringing in risk-bearing capacity, and that helps to grow the economy. But when we think about our infrastructure, we also have to think about why it exists, especially for stock exchanges. Because when you think about it, most of our goods and services trade nicely over the counter. We don't go to the paperclip exchange to buy paper clips. So what is it about our financial products? And I think the commissioner did a very eloquent job of talking about the benefits of markets. But the key thing is our markets are information aggregation engines. Nobody really knows what a stock is worth. The order flow thus has a lot of information, and our exchanges bring that data together. So our exchanges help to reduce the costs of finding a counterparty to the trade, of discovering the price, and of clearing and settlement. Now, in the old days, our exchanges were member-owned or government-owned entities, and that meant they were very slow. But then the technology changed, and the exchanges became tech companies and data companies. And you'll notice many of the large global players, like LSEG and ICE, have actually bought other information companies to add to their product lines because they understand the value of information. So let's talk about the benefits of integration. They're pretty straightforward. For one thing, by cooperating and working more closely with neighbors, we build larger capital markets. That means that businesses have access to a broader pool of capital, and investors have access to more opportunities. Furthermore, we have economies of scale. That means that our institutions can operate at a larger scale that lowers the unit cost. It also means we have better risk sharing, more diversification opportunities. That lowers risk as well. And when countries join together, it makes it easier for global investors to also access the market. Because when you have the same technology, the same infrastructure, similar products, it becomes easier to connect with the exchanges, with the custodians, with the information vendors, and that means better liquidity in the markets. More buyers and sellers in one virtual location that are brought together. And it also provides the opportunity for more effective regulation. When you have harmonization of the rules, when you have cooperation among regulators and enforcement entities, it means you can actually do a better job. But there are problems here. There are a lot of political hazards that there's often a lot of, shall we say, misunderstanding among neighboring countries. And that can get in the way of integration. There's often a fear of the loss of domestic control over our financial markets. Our financial markets are so important for helping us live better lives. A lot of countries really are very hesitant to let those foreigners take over. And then, of course, we have problems of regulatory arbitrage. When it becomes easy to jump across borders, people will naturally jump to the place that has the lowest rules. And then, of course, the bad guys. They will take advantage of regional opportunities to jump across borders to commit fraud, manipulate prices, and try to get away with it. When there is a crisis, and we know that sooner or later there will be, if you look at economic history, we know that sooner or later something happens. When you have more jurisdictions involved, it gets harder to resolve the problem. One of the big problems in the global financial crisis in 2008 was the global nature of the players made it very hard for people in any one country to actually resolve this situation. And then, of course, when you have entities of different size, you have the risk that the big player is going to dominate everything and push out the smaller countries. Oops. Of course, there are costs involved. Negotiating deals doesn't occur in a vacuum. That you have the implementation costs of harmonizing systems. And then even once things are integrated, you'll have all of the normal cross-border challenges of doing business. When you have multiple regulators, multiple legal systems, multiple currencies, currency controls, multiple languages, these are the challenges of everyday life. But I'd like to emphasize that markets are an ecosystem with many different moving parts that work together. And so we need to focus not on only one part, but on all the parts and how they work together. And we definitely see different levels of integration. At one extreme, we have some countries that don't do anything outside of themselves. The next stage is we often see consolidation within a country, and we've seen that here in Pakistan, with the regional exchanges merged together. Then we see cooperation across borders, both at the exchange level, at the regulatory level. We'll often see outsourcing to more efficient players. And not just buying a trading platform, but actually outsourcing operations. So for example, Namibia relies upon the Johannesburg Stock Exchange to operate their infrastructure in a different country, in Johannesburg, South Africa. The matching engine for the Icelandic exchange is in Stockholm, Sweden. There's also less formal integration with coordination, where you harmonize the trading hours, the trading rules, and you'll often have shared infrastructure. Norex, before it became part of NASDAQ OMX, actually was a coordinating group of exchanges in the Nordic regions that basically coordinated and negotiated together for infrastructure. But then at the political level, you need political and regulatory integration, mutual recognition of things like the accounting standards in other countries, passporting of issuers so that if you're approved in one jurisdiction, you can be traded in others. And then we have, of course, the interconnection, things like data, order routing, and most importantly, interoperability of clearing facilities. And we see examples of regional exchanges. BRVM in West Africa has 8 different countries with an office in each one. And I see my time is up, so I'll real quickly wrap up here. That sometimes you see partial ownership of exchanges with others. We've seen mergers take place, both regional and global. But even when you have mergers across borders, the merged exchanges retain their legal local existence. And so they're still under the legal control of their capital markets. And with that, well, not every merger has succeeded, but we can talk about those later. And we definitely have a lot of integration that's occurred. But I'd like to point out that market integration is a natural evolution in the markets. The gains from larger economies of scale, from more investment opportunities, from more diversification opportunities, basically are win-win situations for all involved. When it's done right, the countries do maintain legal control of their capital markets. But there needs to be a lot of political and regulatory coordination. And of course, the details matter a lot. This is an industry where tiny little details can make all the difference, so care has to be taken. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention, thank you for the hospitality, and I look forward to the rest of the day. Shukriya.